The 2023 NBA draft is now in the books. Kobe Bufkin is on his way to Atlanta, and we'll break down all of what transpired for the Atlanta Hawks coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1504 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you very deep into the night on a Thursday evening into Friday. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at the Gametime app. Create an account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed with Gametime. Also, on top of the podcast, I should tell you to make us your first listen here at Locked On Hawks each and every day. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, and please subscribe on Apple or Spotify, YouTube on the video side, etc. And obviously, it's a big day in the NBA. The draft is now in the books. Lots to get to for the Atlanta Hawks. As you might imagine, it is about 2 a.m. as I'm recording this Eastern time, so forgive any punchiness as well. Been a long night of tracking all of the stuff, being down at the Hawks facility. We'll have some video later on from Landry Fields talking about the draft picks, at least 2 of the 3 reported draft picks. Also, we'll touch on the fact that the Hawks did nothing with the actual roster. You know, in some ways, as I tried to warn people a little bit on previous episodes this week, there was no mandate of doing trades today, and that did not happen. In fact, the Hawks did not move anyone on their current roster as of right now. So we'll touch on that later on, but we'll leave with the fact that the Hawks have a pretty interesting player coming into the mix with their first-round pick at 15 overall. For some context here, it was a pretty crazy draft, as they all are in a lot of ways, but there were some surprises before the Hawks came on the board at 15. For one, Bilal Coulibaly rose all the way to 7 overall, which is not a huge surprise necessarily. He was a fast-rising prospect. That was definitely a little bit strange on some level. Then a surprise with Jett Howard going 11th overall. Jett is a guy who I think people were split on, but certainly no one that I saw publicly had him as high as 11 as far as a mock draft projection. That went ahead of the Hawks. And then the big surprise, really a shocker on some level, was that Cam Whitmore of Villanova was still on the board for the Hawks at 15 overall. And if you said that before the draft, I would not have believed you, quite honestly. And I was the one who I would say incessantly was saying on this podcast that a lot can change and things always are different and players always fall, a la Jalen Johnson 2 years ago, AJ Griffin last year. Somebody always falls. But Whitmore could reasonably have gone as high as 4th. He was projected as high as 4th in some mock drafts. And it was legitimately stunning to see him fall all the way down to 15 and eventually down to 20 on the board. Now, we don't know what it is right now, but Whitmore failed some medicals, it seems like. I would have taken him if the medical checked out. I'll say that at 15 overall. But given all the uncertainty there, it seems like it's reasonable to pass on Cam Whitmore, even though, again, in a vacuum, I had him firmly in my top 5, 6, 7 picks. So keep that in mind. But if you were to remove Cam Whitmore, which a lot of teams seemingly did, when the Hawks were on the clock at 15 overall, other than Whitmore, my highest rated player that I had overall as far as a combined like Hawk-specific draft board, as well as my overall big board covering the entire league, that player was Kobe Bufkin from Michigan, and that is the player the Hawks chose at 15 overall. So obviously, if you see behind me on video and people that might not be listeners to this podcast regularly, I am someone who follows, and I would consider myself a fan of the University of Michigan. I have family ties there, etc. I am not biased, at least I try not to be, with regard to any of this stuff. Same thing with the Hawks. I try to give you my unvarnished opinions and sort of even-handed analysis. So I'm sure that some will assume that I'm just in love with Kobe Bufkin. That's reasonable, I suppose, but I understand that. And I didn't have him as high as some did on my board. He was in this range. It was like I was saying he was a top 10 guy in this class, but I think it was a very good pick. I'll leave there. And I saw him play quite a bit over the last 2 seasons and plenty to get to. So I'm going to do a mini report right now on Bufkin. Then later on this week and into next week, I will say, and into summer league, et cetera, we'll do much more on Bufkin. But for now, for sort of the short version of the player, we'll get into that right now. So again, I said this before, but I like to pick quite a bit. I think you can be very pleased with that. He was on my short list of guys that I would describe as being very good values at 15 overall. 2-year guy at Michigan. Basically a freshman in age, though. In fact, he's younger than Brandon Miller, who was a one-and-done player. Younger than the Thompson twins. Younger than Jalen Hood-Schifino. All those guys are one-and-done players. He's the same age as Cason Wallace, Jarris Walker, etc. So a guy who, yes, played 2 years, but is certainly freshman age and is a very young sophomore. 6'5", 6'6", or so, with an 8'6" standing reach. Can play both guard spots, crucially. I think, generally speaking, the appeal of Kobe Bufkin is he's good at basically everything. Now, he's not uber elite at anything, which is sort of maybe a knock on him on some level, but he's very, very well-rounded and not a ton of flaws with Bufkin. I'll start defensively to say true to myself at this point in time. I think it's my friend Brian Schroeder that says to me first, but he was very sort of on a very short list of guys who, with his steal and block numbers this year, very, very good activity, good length, and good hands from Bufkin. He's quick, knows how to kind of stay in front of guys on opposing guards. I like his on-ball stuff as well. With regard to his screen navigation, is pretty effective. He plays hard on defense as well. Good motor on that end of the floor. He was asked about that actually tonight and talked about how that's what got him on the court, he thought, his sophomore season at Michigan, which makes a lot of sense. I'll say this now. Probably the biggest concern, at least in the short term, is that he has to get stronger. He weighed in at about 185 pounds at the combine. That is very, very skinny for someone as long as tall as he is. So if you watch him on tape, that's definitely comes to the forefront. That's a question that a lot of guys have, but certainly one that he's going to have to put on some weight and get stronger. No question about that. But the length is really good for a combo guard, and we'll get into this later on, but Landry Fields was asked about his position multiple times and wouldn't really give one. He just kind of says he's a guard, which is appropriate. I think it's too narrow to kind of drill down into a specific position. I think the appeal of Kobe Bufkin in a lot of ways on offense is that he can play on and off the ball. Same on defense, and the good size to kind of play multiple positions is very helpful in the modern NBA. Also, Michigan's numbers on off this year were much better when he played on both ends of the floor, and I can sort of attest to that. I would say overall he's a good defender, not a fantastic defender. Like Casey Wallace is a better prospect defensively than Bufkin is, but for a 19-year-old guard, I think he's very good on that end of the floor. Big difference, obviously, between being good at the college level and being good at the NBA level defensively, but I think getting stronger is going to be important, figuring out the nuances of pick and roll defense, et cetera. But there's a lot to like defensively for Kobe Bufkin, and then offensively, a lot to like as well. So average 14 a game this year at Michigan, solid efficiency numbers, 85% of the free throw line is very nice to see. From a shooting standpoint, averaged about 17 points and 6 rebounds per game down the stretch of the season for Michigan with very good efficiency. After kind of Michigan gave him the keys more often on offense, one of the big pivots that you probably will have heard of if you're a draft diehard is that Michigan kind of took the ball away from Jett Howard and put the ball into Kobe Bufkin's hands second half of the season. It was much more effective. I can attest to that as well. He's a solid shooter. I wouldn't say he's great. There's a question about how good of a shooter that he is. He is definitely not on the Grady Dick, Jordan Hawkins, Jett Howard level, honestly, as a shooter. But I think he's going to be a good shooter. We'll see how good he is. He moves really well off the ball. That's a crucial and important thing to put forth. Good shot preparation, a high release point. He is left-handed, something to keep him on there. He's really fluid as an athlete. I think he's a good athlete, almost a very good athlete. He's not like Amen Thompson or anything like that, but certainly a good athlete for a guard and is kind of fluid and also a little bit twitchy when he kind of loads up. A good passer as well. Good overall feel for the game. Something Landry Fields said repeatedly about him. Doesn't turn the ball over too much. Good for a young guy. Doesn't have to have the ball either, which is I think is very important on a team with Trae Young and DeJounte Murray right now, especially with Trae long term, is that he can be on or off the ball. Shot the ball well from catch and shoots this year, etc. He can get to the rim. Also a good skill set there. I think I saw that he shot like 67% from the rim in the half court this year. That's a very, very good number, especially in the Big Ten where it's kind of all kind of ground and pound. Two bigs, all that stuff, not a lot of space in the Big Ten, and he was able to play through that. I think as a ball handler, he'll have to improve some, especially when he's going to be playing point guard at times potentially in the future as a backup, but something to keep in mind there. And the other thing that I will say is that he's not the best shot creator like for himself. He can get his own shot, but not like supernatural like Nick Smith, et cetera. So I think overall in offense, and we'll sort of end this particular segment right here, I think that he's probably not going to be a star. I think he has some star activity and some star outs if things go perfectly well. Maybe not super duper star, but like fringe all-star kind of thing on offense. But there's some upside there for sure. I think the combination of his ball handling, his passing, his shooting, his finishing, and his feel for the game could be a very, very good offensive player. When you combine that with good defense as well and good length and sort of good versatility, there's a ton to like with Kobe Bufkin. So we'll get into more of this later, but my short version for now is that this is a good value pick. I think that, as far as like star equity, we'll see. But with regard to like the middle of the first round, 15th overall, to stand pat like the Hawks did and not have to trade up and get a guy that a lot of people had as a lottery pick is a pretty good outcome. It's not one of those that like you like are going crazy about, but at the same time, I would have said this coming into the draft. I'll say it again now. I think I like this fit quite a bit, and I think I like the player quite a bit as well. So we'll leave that there for now. We'll get into a break here from our sponsor. We'll come back, talk more about Kobe Bufkin, as well as Seth Lundy, some extra stuff in the second round potentially, and then the rest of the Hawks roster. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs is fantastic, bringing fit, comfort, and versatility to the table with their products. I feel great and comfortable in my own skin when wearing Birddogs gear, and Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and the leg, give you that sculpted look that you're looking for. They fit much better than regular shorts that are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. And Birddogs also fixes the issue by inventing their cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but also stretches, giving that slimmer fit without having to sacrifice anything with regard to movement. They also use anti-sweat wicking fabric to keep you cool and dry all day long. In the end, Birddogs makes awesome products, honestly, across the board. And you're going to want to check out all of them at birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. When you get there, use the promo code LockedOnNBA. And when you do that, use that code. They will throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with each and every order. One more time, check it all out at birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, and before we get to some stuff of my own on Seth Lundy and kind of what the Hawks did in the second round, I want to play some video and audio for you of Landry Fields. Always interesting to kind of hear from the GM at like 1 a.m, so there probably been a long day, etc. But I have 3 clips for you that I will share now. One, you'll hear the question from Lauren Williams, who basically asked, generally speaking, kind of open things up, talking about Kobe Bufkin. So here's Landry talking about Kobe Bufkin.
Just out of curiosity, when did you kind of identify Kobe Bufkin as someone that you wanted to pick in the first round at number 15, and how does he embody being a Hawk?
So with Kobe Bufkin, when I first saw him this year, I texted one of our guys, one of our scouts, and was like, this kid's pretty interesting. And he agreed. And I think it got serious when one of our intel sources said something along the lines of, there are guys who love the game, and then there's guys who are in love with the game. This is a guy that is in love with the game. And I've mentioned before about Hawks DNA. Hawks DNA is about being in love with this game and giving it your all. And you'd be surprised at how many guys do that and how many don't. But he's a guy that there was no doubt about it. That's a guy that loves this game. And it's not just him, it's with all of the guys that we took tonight. So he's an unbelievable person. When we spoke with him in Chicago, that was another huge moment for me, just very mature, the way he sees the game, the feel, the IQ, the confidence that he has as well. Just a very fluid type of player. You know, can play on ball, off ball, defends, and that's big for us as well. And he's young, still growing, and getting better. So it was a good choice for us. We're very excited about that.
Later on, Landry also got a question kind of about position and stuff like that. And he said he's a guard that can play on and off the ball. That was a quote there. Said he can defend multiple positions. And also Landry said, and I quote, he will be a guy that plays sooner rather than later, I would imagine. End quote. So some interesting context there. I'm not going to play the entire 10-minute audio for you, but one more thing from you'll actually hear my voice on this particular clip, asking kind of what the role looks like for Kobe Bufkin.
Now you talked about what you're seeing in Kobe. As far as role and how he fits into what your scheme looks like and what you see from him there, what do you sort of envision for that?
Yeah, well, right now, I mean, this is a guy that, like, we went beyond any positions and just saw a guy that is a Hawks fit. He has got that Hawks DNA. Very talented. You know, he's obviously a guard, and I think the one of the biggest pieces was his defensive ability. And that's something that, if you look at him from his freshman year into his sophomore year, was a huge jump. And I really credit him. He actually talked about a teammate of his and how he thought he was the best defender on the team when he got there as a freshman. And so what he ended up doing is he ended up watching film of that teammate time and time again in order to be more like him. There's guys that watch film, but to like that in depth and to talk about, you know, certain guys that are on your team that you see where you want to go and you see the guy that's there and then try to emulate that outside of just the NBA is pretty special. So it's like we've got a lot of work to do with him, and we'll kind of see how it shapes up roster wise. But like that's the guy we're willing to take a swing on, and we did.
As we dive into more of the second round stuff for the Hawks, I will just play this up for you as well. I asked basically about what the reality was in the second round. You'll hear the question, kind of me inferring this, but I'll set it up now. The Hawks reportedly, according to Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype, acquired the 39th pick and Mohamed Gay from Washington State. Now, again, it's about 2 a.m. Eastern time. No one has reported the details of that trade. You will hear in this answer and question from me that Landry kind of acknowledges that there is another person that the Hawks traded for, but he can't speak about that. So that's why. And here's the rest of that answer, mostly about Seth Lundy, who the Hawks picked at 46 overall.
I know you mentioned your second rounders, plural. Was there a second guy that you guys acquired, and what else do you make of Seth Lundy and what you're getting out of him?
Yeah, so there's one guy I can't talk about, unfortunately, through NBA rules. But with Seth Lundy, he was actually just here, I believe it was in our last workout. Is it our last workout, Grant? Yeah, our last workout. And he's actually a guy that we've monitored, but he really caught our eye at the combine. He just has an elite skill in shooting, and he plays with toughness. And he came out here and lit it up in front of us, and that's that was part of just who he is. He's been doing that for a long time at Penn State. And a guy where you can never have enough shooting. And again, this is like a character fit. These are the guys that we want to build with, that make it fun to build with, and guys that we know are going to maximize their potential. So we're very excited about him as well.
All right, so again, Mohamed Gay from Washington State is the player in question. I know it's a little bit weird, but as I've said before, the second half of the second round is basically the Wild Wild West. There's lots of things going very quickly. And the Hawks were basically upfront with the media, basically we can't talk about this particular thing. I have heard now multiple sources say that the Hawks have traded for Mohamed Gay, so I'm assuming that they will go. That's going to be happening. I don't know what they gave up for him, so it's tough in some ways. I'll say this right now: it's hard to evaluate the transaction without knowing what they traded. That's a very obvious thing. I had Mohamed Gay a little bit lower, but I will say I also had Seth Lundy, who the Hawks had at 46, a little bit higher. So if you were to flip those two, it would have been a little bit more reasonable for me. So at the end of the day, who actually cares? Doesn't really matter. And the Hawks acquire two very interesting prospects. So with regard to Mohamed Gay, a little bit more of an off-the-radar prospect, but I had somebody tell me actually during the draft when I was asking about second-round options to someone who would know things, basically said, unprompted, the Hawks really like this guy. And that was, I didn't ask about the player. They just said, hey, just so you know, the Hawks like this player. And that was, again, before the Hawks made the pick. So that was something that made the rounds. That was kind of well-known in certain circles. He's a 6'10", big man without shoes, by the way. 7'3" wingspan, 9'2" standing reach. That's very good, center size, very long. Also weighed in, very skinny, 212 at the combine. Very thin right now if you watch him on tape. He is pretty raw, definitely more of a project, more of an upside swing than it's someone basically second round. I think there's kind of two different paths, and the Hawks are kind of doing this a little bit differently here. Seth Lundy is much more of a easily projectable player. And we'll talk about him in a second, but the shooting there, he's an older guy. Mohamed Gay is more of an upside swing. Sam Vecini wrote this in his draft guide, but he actually said that Gay's been playing organized basketball for only 4 years. That's pretty crazy. Was a soccer player growing up in Senegal, ended up being a pretty big recruit, ended up at Washington State, obviously. He's very, very skilled. I've seen him play a couple times. I am not an expert on him. I've seen him play less than a lot of these guys. I will just admit to that right now. I'll be watching more tape on him in the near future. But I'm hearing from behind the scenes and things that, sources and all that stuff, that the Hawks believe he can do more than he was allowed to do, basically, at Washington State. He had a lot of legitimate highlights, though, at Washington State. I was asking people that kind of cover that team closely the last couple of hours as this all broke. And with his size and length, he can face up a little bit. He can shoot a little bit, drive a little bit. He's very skilled for a player of his size. I'm not sure how good of a shooter he's going to be, but the mechanics look pretty good for a player, again, that has center size. Defensively, it's not great tape. I'll say that. That's kind of where I think his NBA career is going to probably pivot, is whether he can defend at a high level, because a player of this archetype, you're going to have to defend, obviously. And I think that's he's just kind of raw right now, feel for the game-wise. But again, I asked people around that program that are smarter than I am about this stuff, and they say the intel is really good on him as well. He plays hard on tape. I definitely saw that when I watched him. So a mixed bag for sure, but certainly a talented guy, an NBA player as far as talent is concerned, and we'll see. As far as I talked about this with Lundy as well in a second, but I got a couple questions like why the Hawks do that. They don't really need this play in the second round. You don't really draft for need, especially for a team that's trying to win. These guys are not going to play right away. As I said, this is more of an upside swing. He might be able to play a little bit of 4 in the future, but I think he's mostly a 5. It's a long-term play, fill out your bench, etc. And we'll leave it there for now. As far as when I get the information on what the trade actually was, etc., I'll be sure to pass that along. If the Hawks use cash, that's even better. I've poked fun at Tony Ressler for selling picks. If they were to buy one, that'd be awesome. I think it's probably a future second-round pick. That's the way that I was, at least the most common framing that I've seen. But we will see what they actually paid to acquire that pick. As for Lundy, I like this pick quite a bit. Lundy was in my top 40 or so. is on my pre-draft list as a guy who I thought was very good value at 46. I believe that's the case. Obviously, it's still a second-round pick. I'm not trying to tell you that he's this great player, but 6'4", the 6'10" wingspan, very long arms coming out of Penn State, 4-year guy there, big-time shooter. That's his appeal. Very obviously, you heard that earlier from Landry Fields talking about that the first thing when I asked the question. 40% from three this year for Seth Lundy. Even better than that at catch and shoot stuff. He's a pretty good athlete too. Not a total like ground-bound guy. He has some pretty good tools across the board in addition to his length, but the shooting is the primary appeal. That is very, very obvious. I think he can do a little bit more off the dribble than some players with this archetype for sure, but not a guy who gets to the rim a ton in what I've seen and watched him a lot in the Big Ten. So I can't imagine he'll be asked to do that very much in the NBA either. He's going to be probably just a floor spacing 3-and-D kind of guy, but knows how to play. I think could be a valuable archetype potentially. It's a second round pick, so it may not work out, but I can definitely see a path for Seth Lundy to be a rotation player in the NBA, which is all you're looking for at 46. If you can get a guy that can play for you and shoot and have a sort of a marketable skill, which is the shooting, have good enough length. Defensively, we'll see. I don't think he's gonna be great, but he was not terrible in college by any means. So older guy for sure, lower upside probably, but someone that I think was a good value in that slot and a good pick overall. I had a question from someone, I forget who it was now, so my apologies, basically saying, doesn't he overlap with AJ and Bogey? And the answer is yes, but also who cares? In the second round, you're drafting a guy that you think might fit for you long-term. Bogey is getting older, obviously, just on an extension, but and AJ will be a big part of your future. But you don't pass on somebody at 46 because you think they're going to be too much like AJ and Bogey, because guess what? No one at 46 is going to play for you this year anyway, barring something crazy. And I think you just take the best available player. Whether that's Lundy or not, obviously, is up for debate. You can argue and think about, especially in the second round, it's very easy to kind of nitpick and see where guys went. Like, he was not the absolute highest rated guy that I had left on my board there, I don't think, but he was close to it. It was either him or Jordan Miller, I believe, were probably the two highest rated guys I had on my board at that point. So I like the pick quite a bit through that lens. He went one pick after Gigi Jackson, two after T.J. Sissoko and Ryan Repair, who actually, those were the guys that I had the next three above him. So, and Amari Bailey. So all those guys went in kind of a similar range, but I think Lundy was about the best pick they could have made probably. But it's a second-round pick. And even I, as someone who values second-round picks more than most, would acknowledge it's kind of a we'll-see proposition. And the Hawks have had some trouble in the second round for sure, but they have two swings here. One's more of a, I won't say low upside, but Seth Lundy's more of a projectable guy. Mohamed Gay, more of an upside pick. And we'll see from there. So we'll leave it there for now. But I generally think, as far as the draft stuff only is concerned, the Hawks had a very good night. Kobe Bufkin, above average pick for me at 15 overall. Not an absolute grand slam, but one that I like quite a bit. 39 Mohamed Gay is higher than I would have taken him. Like, there were a bunch of guys, and obviously I'm not sure what the trade details are, but even as far as like who was on the board there, I would have rather had Max Lewis. I would have rather had Amari Bailey. I would have rather had Ryan Repair. So I'm not saying it's a slam dunk, but it's at least understandable. He is a talented player. And then 46 for Seth Lundy, as I mentioned a second ago, probably the highest rated guy I had left, either him or Jordan Miller. So definitely a big fan of that. And I think overall, as far as the night is concerned for the Hawks, I'm not going to grade things, but I think it was a very, very good night. That can be changed. That could change in the future. I mean, there are obviously drafts that people like that don't work out. Drafts that people don't like that do work out. I'm the first to say, as far as the 15 was concerned in this draft, that was a flat range. Could they have gone somewhere else? Absolutely. But I think Bufkin's the guy that I would have taken, all things considered, unless Ken Whitmore was actually going to pass the medical stuff and all that stuff. If he was a cross-off, Bufkin would have been the guy I chose. So overall, I know I've ranted and raved a little bit about this stuff now, but I think a good night for the Hawks through the prism of the draft. We'll have more of this in the future, obviously. Deep dives on all these guys in the future, and this Summer League, all that stuff is coming up in sort of the next couple of weeks on this podcast. Subscribe and rate and review all that stuff. We'll have one more break here from our sponsor. We'll come back and talk more about the non-draft stuff with regard to the roster and what did or did not happen, I should say, in this particular draft. But first, a word from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. If you've been trying to find tickets for a big event at the last minute, it can be really stressful. Probably not the best idea for your mental state or your wallet. And after all, buying tickets should not be a hassle at all. In fact, it shouldn't be, and it isn't with Gametime. With Gametime, it's the fastest, easiest way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater. You can avoid stress and start getting hyped for the events that you're looking forward to this summer, because there are killer deals in Gametime, and they have the best price guarantee. Summer being here means there's lots of events happening around me in Atlanta. I'm sure there are around you as well with Gametime. it really is easy to find awesome deals. Plus, you can also see images of where your seat's going to be at the event, and they have protection if your event happens to be canceled. Forget all the months of planning in advance. There are deals on tickets right up to the day of the event with Gametime. The Gametime guarantee also means you get the best possible price. If you can find tickets in the same section and row for less, you'll be credited 110% of the difference with Gametime. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy tickets just a matter of seconds. Plus, the tickets actually be delivered directly to you. And really, they appear on your phone to make things much, much easier. Download the Gametime app right now. Create an account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you enjoy DFS, make sure you check out the warming app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks Daily Fantasy made easy. It's amazing. I know that you will love it as well. It's very easy to use. I've been playing there for quite some time now. It's really a breeze to operate. All you have to do is pick 2 to 6 players to actually choose whether they have more or less than a certain number of points or rebounds or assists in the basketball space. And at PrizePicks, with 25 times the money on your entries, they have sports and numbers offered across the board. That includes the NBA, college basketball, WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, NHL, PGA, soccer, esports, and much more. And a whole entry can be done in just a minute or less. It's that easy and it's that quick. Plus, it's just you against the numbers. Makes it straight ahead and really easy to operate. They have safe and fast withdrawals at PrizePicks. They're operating in more than 30 states now, plus Canada. Download the app right now with PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com. Sign up, play daily fantasy sports right now today. If you're a first-time user, also get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKED ON. Don't forget that promo code. It is LOCKED ON. At sign up for the instant deposit match up to $100. Check it out now with PrizePicks. All right, before we get out of here on this very late night edition of the podcast, the Hawks didn't make any moves today with regard to the actual roster and all of the trade rumors that have come up in the last couple of days. I did say on the show, I think both Tuesday and Wednesday, but definitely on Wednesday, that and even on Twitter today, like it would not surprise me if the Hawks don't make any trades during the draft. And that was seen as controversial, I suppose, but this happened last year. I'll just say that now. The Hawks made a couple of big trades last summer, but the DeJounte Murray trade and the Kevin Huerter trade happened basically at the end of June and beginning of July, after the draft, about a week after the draft. And I'm not saying it's going to be the exact same thing that happens again, but you don't have to do all your business on draft night. Would it have been interesting or fun, potentially, if they made some trades tonight? Sure, it would have been. More to talk about all that stuff. But if you look around the league, actually, there weren't a ton of player transactions tonight. It was actually, I would think, a little bit surprising across the board how little activity with players happened tonight. There were some draft trades, of course, but there wasn't a ton going on other than the kind of early in the day blockbuster that sent Jordan Poole to Washington. But that wasn't during the draft. That was before the draft. So anyway, there was some notebook kind of intel stuff reported from Jake Fisher on Thursday morning. He talked about the Hawks and Pacers making headway potentially on a DeAndre Hunter deal to Indiana. That fell apart, and obviously Indiana made a bunch of other deals today. They actually drafted Jarris Walker in the first round, so we'll see all that. I wouldn't cross them off entirely, but that did not happen, of course. Jake also reported that Hunter, Collins, Capella, and Murray were all seen as viable trade candidates, at least are still seen as probably that. And the Hawks, quote, maintain a pursuit of Pascal Siakam, as we discussed on the last 2 shows before the draft. Hunter also was kind of, I guess, in Jake's mind, the most prominently involved in some trade stuff. That's interesting. And the last thing here that I thought was interesting on the Siakam front, Chris Haynes said before the draft that there is a growing sentiment that Toronto star Pascal Siakam, who was on an expiring deal again, would not re-sign with a team who attempts to trade for him, as his preference is to remain with the Raptors. So tough to trade for him without that kind of assurance, or at least kind of semi-assurance. We'll see. None of this closes the door on trades. So I think the same status quo is out there. I heard some stuff today about maybe like a team like Houston looking at Clint Capella, for instance. They didn't fix their center need tonight. That was out. That was kind of out there. John Collins, Brooklyn's still in the mix for guys like that. They did draft Noah Clowney, but there are teams out there. I know that Hunter's gotten some calls. I won't name the teams because I don't know for sure on those, but I think all 3 of those guys, I think Murray, they're all in the mix to be traded still. I still believe that fundamentally the thing that will surprise me the most, as I've said a few times, but if you're a new listener, what will surprise me the most is if the Hawks don't trade anyone. And I mean, if they roll back with their top 10 from last year, I will be surprised by that. That's about the only thing that will surprise me, to be honest, is if they don't trade anyone from the top 10 players from last year. But in the meantime, there's no rush on this. And usually, not always, but usually there's kind of a dead period between the draft and like June 29, 30, 30, and then July 1. Not always, but it's like teams filling out summer league rosters and signing two-ways. I'm checking Twitter even while I'm talking right now, because oftentimes you'll get a two-way announced, you'll get a summer league roster invite announced or reported along the way. And the Hawks did talk about summer league a little bit tonight. Landry didn't name names about like the guys on the roster, but he did say there was a couple guys on the team roster. I would guess Tyrese Martin. I would guess probably Donovan Williams, maybe AJ Griffin to summer league. And I think you will almost certainly see, and Landry confirmed this, Kobe Bufkin, Seth Lundy, and Muhammad Gay going to summer league with the Hawks. But other than that, like, you spend that kind of the next few days kind of recharging a little bit, filling out those rosters, two ways. And by the way, there are 3 2-ways now for the Hawks. They only have one guy on one at this moment with Donovan Williams, so plenty of work to be done there. And then you kind of shift back to free agency. And the Hawks don't have like the normal free agent, high profile stuff. Like, they can sign minimum contracts, obviously they can build around, but it's mostly like the trade wins really start to flow again when you get closer to free agency actually opening. So if you're holding your breath on trades, I understand you want to see that stuff tonight, but it's not a big deal that the Hawks didn't make trades tonight, in my opinion. And we'll have much more on that in the future, but I'm not shocked. For those, I got a couple questions about, like, are you surprised? No, not really. I'm not surprised about this. Again, I'll be surprised if nothing else happens in the future, but there we are. And last thing, young guys like Kobe Bufkin, especially first-round picks, people always want to kind of plug them into roles. Talked about this a little bit earlier in some respects, but I do think that Bufkin, as a mid-first-round pick, will probably play a role this year with the Hawks. I think Landry acknowledged that. At the same time, you're not penciling a 19-year-old in to be your third guard, play 20 minutes a night on a good team necessarily, even as a guy who was drafted there. First of all, he's freshman age. And second of all, rookies are not great. AJ had a good year. Obviously, I thought that was a little bit on previous episodes as well. My guess at this very moment would be that Kobe Bufkin plays considerably more than Jalen Johnson did 2 years ago. And if anything, the same or less than AJ played this year is my guess. Now, a lot can change based on the roster and all that stuff, who the Hawks bring in, if they were to sign another guard, et cetera. But we will see. And again, overall, I know I've rambled on and on this podcast, but a good night for the Hawks, even without any big moves to change up the roster. We'll see what that sort of entails. But if I'm a Hawks fan tonight, I am pretty pleased by what transpired. TBD on the package for 39th pick, so I can't really give you that full analysis. But Bufkin pick, certainly a good grade for me. 46th pick, taking Lundy, good grade for me there. So all in all, a positive evening, and we'll have much more coverage. As far as my next podcast, I'm not sure exactly when it will be. If there is big news, I will certainly parachute in with a podcast as quickly as humanly possible. If there isn't anything big between now and Saturday or Sunday, I probably will wait until Sunday to post a new podcast to go into the next week. And we'll definitely have multiple shows, probably 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes, something like that, between now and the start of free agency. So I have some plans on guests. Hopefully someone can talk more about Kobe Bufkin, someone can talk more about Seth Lundy, draft stuff overall, and then obviously a little bit of a look ahead to the roster stuff as free agency looms. So stay tuned for all of that. Please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're a new listener, we do appreciate you joining the show today. Please take a second and subscribe and tell a friend about the show. I do appreciate that. Please follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Follow my written work on the Patreon side, patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thank you very much for listening, and pardon my ramblings here at 2:30 a.m. Eastern time or so, and we'll see everybody next time.